Albert Johnson knows the rules. He knows not to stare too long at the Silver Salmon River, and he keeps his distance from the Verna Hall garbage dump when visiting Daphne Louise. He knows that as long as he avoids certain places and doesn't go out at night, that he should be fine. Fells Glen could be an ordinary town. The people are polite to each other and gossip travels fast. Just last week, it only took the town a few hours to spread the news of the disappearance of Colin Whitcomb, the mayor's son. As long as you follow the rules, your stay in Fells Glen will be pleasant, maybe even enjoyable. The rules are why Albert found himself sitting outside Daphne's window as she watched her favorite episode of In the Abyss of Love inside. The rules are why he watched as she got up to answer the phone and missed the part of her show that she had been talking about for the last week. The rules are why he watched her break down crying. The rules are why he was sitting outside instead of inside, comforting her. There's a large tree sitting in a small grove on Wilkinson Farm, an abandoned farm that's on Albert's way home from work. The owners, the Wilkinson family, broke the rules one day, or that's what they say. The police arrived after someone driving by heard the Wilkinsons screaming. All they found were a trail of leaves leading from the tree to the house, and their skins. That was the night a new rule was made. Never go into the Wilkinsons' farm after 7, the time the screaming started. Daphne walked to the window, and for a second Albert thought that maybe Daphne could see him. But then he remembered. He'd gone into Wilkinson Farm to retrieve a stack of newspaper that had fallen off his truck. Now he knew what had happened to the Wilkinson family on that night so long ago. He knew that the call that Daphne had just gotten was the police, telling her that they found his skin lying at the edge of that damned farm. Welcome to Fells Glen. In Fells Glen, at the intersection of Hilltop and Fitzgerald, lies the Marie Valkyrie Memorial Library. It's a large building of red brick that stands out among the homes it sits amongst. In the lobby of the library, there is a pedestal with a plaque that reads Library Rules, and underneath, in smaller lettering, found lying on the floor during the summer of 1995. Above this plaque is a slip of paper covered by a sheet of glass and bolted to the pedestal. Written on the paper in faded blue crayon is the following. Dear person, my name is Jenny Green. I want to go home, but they locked the doors a while ago. I didn't mean to fall asleep. I really didn't. I want to go home. It can't get me at home. I can hear it moving around downstairs, looking for me. I got away, but I want to go home, and the doors are locked. It's going to find me again. It has no eyes, but it saw me last time. It's got lots of arms and legs, and moves like a spider. It's so fast, and I hate spiders. It's climbing up the stairs now. I can hear the groaning noises it makes when it gets close. I want to go home. I'm covered in black icky stuff that drips off the thing, and it smells so bad I want to puke. I hope it doesn't find me. It is going to get me. It's now standing on the other side of the desk, waiting for me to come out. I can hear it. Mommy, I love you, okay? Give James a hug for me. If Daddy comes back, tell him how mad I am at him for missing my party. You have to find someone to walk Sammy for the Wiltshires. He's just a puppy, so he can't walk himself yet. I think I can make it if I run. I'm a really fast runner. I love you, Mommy. Little James, too. Jenny Green hasn't spoken once since she was found huddled in a trash can. Due to many disappearances, it is advised that patrons don't stay in the library after closing hours. Deep in the dense woods of Hilbert Hill, out past the old Jeffrey watermill, where the trees stand tall, tangled, and dead, lies an old, dilapidated shed. Long ago, when Fells Glen was younger, some kids had a sadistic hunger. They took their dates to this remote place and cut them down with a calm, straight face. Marked in blood, and with a crazed fervor, they called to their hellish observer. Something evil was raised that dark night. It slaughtered the killers with delight. Then came the death of poor Jacob Morse. He followed a growling to its source. It led him to that old broken shed. He went inside, and now he is dead. A few years later, bum William Sharp was tired of sleeping under his tarp. He slipped inside, poor, tired, and alone. Not much of him was found, simply bone. It wasn't long till people did learn, males who go are doubtful to return. Over the years the death tolls raised still. You can't stop the beast of Hilbert Hill. If you travel from Silver Salmon River's edge, past the Verna Hall garbage dump, and keep going along Rolfe Turnpike, you might hear low, mournful moans coming from the darkness of St. Paul's Wood. If you follow those moans, you'll find yourself in a clearing in which sits a circle of tall stones with holes at the top. The human-like moan coming from these stones has been the subject of much speculation and rumor in Fells Glen. In fact, that was why Colin Whitcomb, the mayor's son, was standing on the edge of the small clearing. Well, actually, it was because of a girl. So what, are you just gonna stand there? She was standing a ways behind Colin, with her hands on her hips. So much for proving you're anything more than a pampered rich kid. Colin wiped the sweat from his palms. I'm just trying to figure out where the moaning is coming from. He heard a light laugh behind him. Sure. He waved his hand behind him and walked up to the nearest massive stone towering over him. The stones were covered in moss and vines that climbed nearly all the way to the hole at the top. He stared at it, the constant low moans creeping into his chest and making his heart beat faster and faster. I think Colin tugged at the vine to see if it would support his weight. The noise might be coming from inside. Colin soon found himself climbing up the stone until his hands could grip the edges of the hole at the top. With a great heave, he pulled himself up so he could see deep down into the darkness inside the stone. Something about the darkness made his hair stand on end, and goosebumps form on his arms. He felt a lump form in his throat, and was about to climb down when he felt a strong push that sent him into that hole. It was so tight in there. The girl's smiling face appeared over the edge of the hole. I tried to call for help, but it was too tight. I tried to get out, but I couldn't reach. I was in there so long, and no one came. It was so lonely, and I was so scared. Soon the darkness came, but I kept trying to scream for help. I was stuck and alone for so long. Now that I've found a replacement, I can leave. With that, the girl's face faded away. Colin tried to call for her to come back, but the hole was so tight that the only sound he could make was a long, low, mournful moan. The Verna Hall garbage dump wasn't always the place where people threw their trash. Sam remembered the days when a large building stood in its place. Sam loved that old building, and the days his owners brought him there to visit Janice Clark were some of the best. Janice Clark was the nicest vet he'd ever met, and his fourth favorite person in the world, under his owners and a young girl who used to take him on walks. It might still have been that familiar building if Janice wasn't accused of killing Marie Valkyrie. Sam had been on the way there with his owners when he saw the flames roaring from every window. He remembered the heat. He remembered the feel of his leash holding him back as he watched the building collapse in a fiery heap. His owners said that she'd set the building on fire when she found out she was the main suspect, and the next time Sam was near where the building had stood, it had become a garbage dump. It wasn't long after the dump was erected that the cats started to disappear around town. Then the first death occurred. A young boy was found dead, hanging by his hair from the fence surrounding Verna Hall, with the words, "May Facay" is a liar, carved into his chest by small claws. Several deaths later, and people stopped going inside the dump, instead tossing their trash over the fence and leaving quickly. Sam knows because his owner started to bring him everywhere after his wife died. Sam looked up at the sign at the opening of the garbage dump and whined loudly. He didn't want to go in. About an hour ago, his owner had gone inside because a young girl was calling for help. Sam paced back and forth outside the gates of Verna Hall, his tail tucked between his legs. He didn't want to go in, but he knew he had to. His owner needed him. So slowly and carefully, Sam began to make his way through the piles of discarded items in search of his owner. The next day, an old man and his dog were found dead, hanging from the fence outside Verna Hall garbage dump. Carved into the old man's chest were the words, "It wasn't me." Carved in the dog's chest were the words, "Good dog." I'm sitting on my couch usually. The room is dark, the only light coming from the television, which is playing a rerun of In the Abyss of Love. It's the episode where Tommy finds his sister's body under the floorboards, except there's no noise. People talk, but nothing comes out. At first, I thought it might be muted, but I couldn't find the remote to fix it. The silence is so eerie. The longer I sit there, the more uncomfortable I felt. Lucas Desmond looked up from his notepad and pushed his glasses up his nose. "Miss Stone, how often do you have this dream?" Rose wiped her wet eyes. "I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 times a week. I don't dream of anything else." He nodded. "I see. Go on, please." She sighed. "Eventually the silence gets to be too much, and I have to leave. But when I get up, all the sounds come back. The television is deafening. Tommy is screaming at the lead detective that they aren't finding his sister's killer, and sirens are blaring in the background. It's around that time when I hear the other sounds." Lucas frowned. "The screams? They aren't just screams. They're pleads. I need to know where they're coming from, so I follow them to an old shed in the backyard. I'm standing outside the door of the shed, but the door is all wrong." "Wrong?" He raised an eyebrow. "It's not right. It isn't a door that belongs on a shed, it's a bedroom door. There's a little pink cat sticker stuck under the doorknob, and the letters MV are carved in the center. I don't want to open it, but I can hear the little girl screaming on the other side. She's calling for help, pleading. I can hear her choking and gasping. She's crying about her legs, pleading for them to stop. I reach for the door, but just as my hand touches the knob, it opens." Lucas sighed and closed his notebook. This was the 3rd person since he'd moved to Fells Glen that had come to him complaining about the same dream. All of them started and ended the same. "Please continue." "It only opens a crack, and a bloody arm reaches out. The girl cries for me to help her. She wants me to grab her hand and pull her out. Her hand grabs at the floor, and her screams echo throughout the cold night. I want to help her, but there's something wrong. I'm not sure, but the idea of grabbing that arm makes my skin crawl. My mind is screaming to just walk away." Lucas nods, and Rose starts to cry, and I do. Marie Valkyrie was a one-of-a-kind girl. Aidan Hughes would always say. You'd never find her without a smile, and her attitude was so contagious that even the old milkman, who in those days was still as grumpy as today, couldn't keep himself from laughing at her antics. She would get these ideas in her mind, and they were the most inspired ideas. She once spent 3 months tending to the circle of stones in St. Paul's Wood, so that it was the perfect place to picnic. In those days, the stones didn't moan as they do today. She also spent a lot of time up at that old abandoned shed on Hilbert Hill. One day she came down and wanted the entire town to help her clean the place up. She claimed that the little folk living under the shed would give good fortune to anyone that helped. She wanted everyone to have a chance at happiness. See, that was the thing about Marie. She only had to ask, and the entire town would rally behind her crazy antics, no matter the reason. That's just who she was. You know that alleyway off Main Street? The one I tell you to never go down? Back before things changed in Fells Glen, the alleyway was drab, dark, and boring. One day, Marie took a camera and started snapping pictures of all the people that lived in Fells Glen. She said she was going to line the walls of that alley with the smiling pictures of all the people she loved. It took her a week, but when she was done, the alleyway was transformed into a place that radiated warmth. Jordan Winnia had heard Old Man Aiden talk about that alley many times, but he never mentioned why she shouldn't go inside. A chill crawled up her spine as she made her way through the now unused alley. Her hands ran along the pictures that lined the walls, but after a closer look, she immediately drew her hand away. Every single person stared at her with such an intense look of malice that she felt the need to pick up her pace. She was nearing the end when she heard the whispers coming from all around her. "You don't belong here." Jordan stepped from that alley and vowed to never go in again. Mae Fouquet slipped under the police tape that cut off a section of Silver Salmon's riverbank from the general public. She already knew the cause of death. Even before she took the sheriff job, there were tales of people who drowned after staring too long into its dark depths. "It's another one, ma'am. It was a young officer, whose name she didn't bother to remember. Gordon Pyrice. It looks like he knelt near the edge, dipped his face in, and never took it out again." She looked along the beach, hoping to see something that might lead to the reason for these deaths, knowing that there was nothing to see. The white-gray stones of the riverbank stretched on until the river curved from sight. When she was a child, before all these deaths, she would come here. Her, Janice Clark, and Marie Valkyrie would spend a lot of time cleaning up the river. Back then, things were better. Back before they ever went into the house on Willard Street. Back before she realized the world was a kill-or-be-killed place. "Just like the others, his fingers are dug into the dirt and there's a green residue around the neck. Would you like me to send it to the lab?" She sighed. "We already know what it is from the last 100 times we sent it in. It's algae. There's no reason to bother the lab with it." She pulled a small flask from her jacket and took a few gulps, letting the burn of whiskey distract from the memories of 316 Willard Street. Her eyes roam over the glass-like water as she sips from the flask again. That night had caused her to do things that she wasn't proud of. If only Janice hadn't threatened to go forward with what she knew. Maybe then Mae would have someone to talk to about the craziness in the town. Why had she stayed in Fells Glen? She kept asking herself, but she already knew the answer. The answer was written on Mae's face when she watched Marie get dragged into that room. The answer was written on Mae's face when she watched Janice burn. The answer sat in the pit of her stomach and had growled every day just to remind her of what she'd done. "Ma'am?" She felt a hand on her shoulder and was pulled roughly back from the edge of the river. She found herself kneeling at the bank, with her fingers dug into the dirt, and her face inches from the water. She pulled back and stood quickly, wiping her hands and straightening her suit. "We're going to need more signs warning of the dangers of staring into the river. Many more signs, and possibly a drive-by once or twice a night." "Are you okay, ma'am?" The officer had that caring innocence in his voice that grated at Mae's nerves. She forced a smile and lied with everything she had. "Yeah, I'm just tired." Leland Silva loved going to the town square in Fells Glen. It was a beautifully green patch of grass, with benches on each side and a small tree in the middle. This was the only place where his mother would allow him to wander freely, because she could see him no matter where he went. Oftentimes, Leland would spend his time chasing butterflies while his mother waited for the next bus to bring them home. This day was like every other. They arrived, and his mother sat down to do a crossword before the bus came, and Leland ran off to find some insects to torture. He was looking around the tree for ants when he spotted it. There, sitting in the bright sun, not 5 feet from his mother, was a small door. The door stood just over his height and smelled like daffodils and cinnamon. Leland walked over and touched the white paint with his finger. The already chipping paint stuck to his finger as he pulled away, revealing a spot of wood where the paint once was. He looked around to the other side, but only saw the same chipped paint door. "It's not going to bite." He turned to see a young girl sitting a few feet behind him. She was wearing a dirty onesie, and every time she tilted her head, she had to straighten the thin top hat that sat there. "Who are you?" Leland stuffed his finger up his nose. "I am Athena. I live close by. I saw this and had to come see." She leered at his nose picking, and Leland stared at her eyes. It was as though there were holes, and her head was filled with blackness. Leland nodded and began to examine the door. "Should we open it?" She smiled wide with her teeny mouth. "Whatever's on the other side wants us to. You can hear it if you lean in close." Leland laid his ear against the door, and sure enough he could hear a faint voice. "Hello? Can someone please open the door? I'm stuck. I just need some help with the door." "I'm gonna help you out," Leland called at the door. "Just hold on." Athena was standing right behind Leland as his fingers wrapped around the knob. He was about to turn it when his mother called out to him. "Leland, come on, the bus is here." Leland ran toward his mother. "Mom, there's a door, and someone needs help." However, when Leland looked back, both the door and Athena were gone. Only butterflies fluttered where the door had once stood. Leland, now 17, never forgot about that door, partially because it was so bizarre, and partially because that was the last time his mother took him to the town square. She stopped after the children who played there started disappearing. Jordan Winnia sat across from an old man who was intently focusing on a crack in the table that stood between them. His hair was a mess, and when he finally did look at her, she could see something in his eyes that spoke of things he might not want to remember. He stuck his finger in his mouth and began to nibble on his nail, every once in a while his eyes returning to that crack in the table. "Sir, my name is Jordan. I'm investigating all the strange things that are happening in this town, and came across 316 Willard Street." She spoke softly, trying not to startle him, but when she mentioned the street, his body tensed up. "Yeah, and?" He almost growled the words. "Well, that place was called Haunted long before any of the other strangeness happened. In fact, I can accurately trace the haunting to a specific time, but the only thing I can find is a name. Lewis Pierce. I understand that you were the sheriff at the time." She could see the weariness invade his face as he spoke. "It was the year I quit the police force. It must have been 60 years ago. I want to forget it, but..." He paused, and it was a full minute before he spoke again. "There was a girl, Willow Davis, who had gone missing. She wasn't the first. At the time, young girls had been vanishing often, and it had the entire town blanketed with fear." Jordan leaned forward as the man continued. "We all knew Lewis. We waved at him in the street, and he played games with the neighborhood youth. It was a Tuesday when we heard complaints of screaming coming from the Pierce estate. I thought the worst. Something had happened to Lewis. I had to break through the door after there was no response from anyone inside. I remember the house smelled heavily of daffodils and cinnamon. It was an overpowering stench, and I had to cover my nose to continue into the house. The fireplace in the living room was adorned with pictures of neighborhood children. There must have been hundreds of them, each of them smiling, with a balloon in their hand. I remember the balloon because it was always pink and in the shape of a cat. I called out, but the only response I got was some shuffling from upstairs. I called for backup immediately, climbed the stairs, and found myself standing in front of a door. A white door with the sticker of a cat beneath the knob. When I opened the door, I was hit with a stench that outdid the daffodils and cinnamon. The blinds were closed, but I could hear labored breathing coming from nearby. I could barely see, so I switched on my flashlight. Lying on the floor was Lewis, clearly dead, his blood everywhere. Next to him was Willow Davis. She clutched a knife in her hand, and she was eerily pale. I rushed to her side and went to pick her up, only to find that she was incredibly light, because the bastard had cut off her legs. I'll never forget that day, not because of what happened to Willow, but because in the basement we found 25 sets of legs on display, all of them for missing children. Suddenly, he reached out and gripped Jordan's hand, his eyes wild with concern. "Please, just stay away from that place. Nothing good can come from there." Leland Silva didn't like unanswered questions, and memories that didn't make sense left him uneasy. This is why he had sat awake late one night on the bench in town square, waiting for the door to appear again. This is why he always recorded in the abyss of love to find all the plot holes. This is why he went up to Fletcher's home for the abandoned to visit Jenny Green, even though she never said a word. This is why he was standing on the verge of the infamous Butler Street dead end. His footfalls, as he made his first steps onto the street, echoed off the silent empty buildings that lined this dead end. The walls of the building were covered in chalk drawings of pink cats, girls playing, rainbows, and color. Seeing them anywhere else would bring a smile to his face, but here they felt wrong. Here they felt less like the happy scribbling of children and more like the dread sign of something hard, dark, and unwanted. He pulled his collar up to shield his neck from the sudden cold, and continued down the street. All his life he was told tales of the Butler Street dead end. Some said that people who go in don't come out. Others claimed that their bodies are found sitting in the middle of the road, staring out onto Butler Street until they are moved away. Most say that no one has ever made it to the end. They say that the people who go in come running out yelling and crying, not 5 minutes after going in. Leland didn't like unanswered questions. This is why he often volunteered at the library and stayed late so he was last one out. This is why he ate lunch among the Moaning Stones, even though they made his skin crawl. This is why, when every fiber of him wanted to turn around, he kept putting one foot in front of the other. He stepped into the darkened trees, and instantly his arms were covered with goosebumps. The air grew heavy and hot. A coppery smell of daffodils and cinnamon filled his nose to the point of choking. The creaking of the trees in the wind he could not feel grew louder until he had to cover his ears in order to continue. Ahead, the trees grew denser, the darkness deepening and the sky growing a deep shade of purple. Leland had fought the urge to run away and took another step when he saw it. It was a simple movement, a shadow rushing by in the darkness of the trees. It was simple and quick, just a rustling of leaves, but it made Leland's throat clench. Sweat began to bead on his forehead, and his hands grew into fists that he pressed on the side of his head to keep the sounds of the trees out. His shirt felt heavy, and his shoes wouldn't move. For minutes he sat there, in the darkness of the trees, waiting for whatever was out there to move again. When it did, he ran. In moments he had fallen to the street, at the entrance of the Butler Street dead end, tears streaming down his face, and gasping for air. He sat there for a while, slowly pulling himself together. It wasn't until he stood and looked around that he noticed that every person who lived near the entrance to the dead end had come out of their house. They all stood there, in the safety of their lawns, just watching as Leland began to walk away from that horrible dead end. Jenny Green has been scared before. Fear was a creeping darkness that followed her all her life. Even here she feels the paralyzing grasp of terror. Every night she sits with her covers pulled up to her chin, staring at the corner of her room. The darkened corner, not illuminated by the moon out her window. Jenny was scared that night she spent in the library. She can still smell its horrible stench whenever she looks at a book, and is still terrified that any noise she makes might bring that horrible thing from the depths of the library basement. She knows that if it finds her, it will harvest her legs. She was scared then, her first time being truly afraid. Since that night, Jenny hasn't spoken a word, and her mother was unable to cope. Jenny remembers how much her mother tried to contact her father, and how much of a toll the whole ordeal was taking on her. It was Jenny that found her mother lying in the bathtub, everything crimson and unmoving. Jenny was scared then too. She still sees her mother sitting there, peacefully dead, every time she tries to take a bath. That's when her father showed up, all smiles and good intent. But where was he when she was growing up? Where was he when she was trapped in with that thing? Where was her father when her mother was begging for his help? Jenny denied his help immediately and harshly. They found her father's body the next day, a victim of the Silver Salmon River. That's how she ended up at Fletcher's home for the abandoned, an orphanage hugging the bank of the river that runs through Fells Glen. Every night she stares into the corner of her room because she's terrified to sleep, and it stares back, its eyes bright, its mouth a wide frown. Every night it appears there, with eyes of dark intent and a foreboding presence. Jenny knows that one day it will move. One day it will step out of those shadows and come for her. She can feel it deep in her gut, and even though she knows it won't help, she keeps a bat under her bed, and she watches it. Every night, all night. Jenny reaches her hand down under her bed, just to feel that the bat is still there. Just as she's about to pull her hand up, she hears a small whimper, and feels a familiar, friendly cold nose nuzzle her palm. She smiles gently, and her creeping, frowning darkness fades away. "Hello, Sam," she says, for the first time in 9 years. From the personal diary of patient 110, Kyle James. I'm safe in here. These walls of cloth and rubber protect me from what's outside. I sit in my cell alone, a small ray of sunlight the only evidence that there is anything else outside this room. And here I am safe, and in a place like Fells Glen, finding a safe place is like trying to fly a plane through the eye of a needle. People have tried, but they've only ended up with their heads in the silver salmon, or worse. I love my daughter and my wife. Loved, all sense of time is lost in this place. It's been years since I've had the taste of my wife's pumpkin pie. I can barely remember the creamy sweet flavor. The crust was something she had to work on, but the filling was divine. Maybe once I get out of here, she'll make it for me. I'll have to wait though, because it's not safe outside. This place of the sick, this is the only place where I know I will be safe. The axe had been in the tool shed, and the back door would make too much noise if I went for it, so I had to make do with the poker from the fireplace. There was no way I would allow this town to take my wife and beautiful infant from me. It was dark in the house as I searched the rooms. I knew it was there, and the scared expression of my Maria told me that she knew it too. She wanted me to stop, probably scared that if I found something she might lose me. Bless her. We all hid in the bathroom, and I could hear the creature outside the door. It was looking for us. This thing, born in this damned town. That was when the baby started crying. It would find us if that baby wasn't quiet. My wife started screaming when I covered the baby's mouth and nose with my hand, but the creature was right outside the door. It would only be a few moments before it found us, and my wife wouldn't stop screaming. So I silenced her too. Love. All sense of time is lost in this place, and I miss her pumpkin pie. Maybe she'll make it for me once I get out. Being sheriff is a demanding job. It's their job to keep the peace, to make sure that people feel safe in their homes at night, even if they really aren't. A good sheriff does whatever it takes to avoid panic and maintain civility in the town they protect. The movement of information had to be controlled, or one small problem could snowball into something they could never hope to control. May Fouquet used her free hand to wipe the sweat from her forehead, only to have the now muddy waters of Blue Velvet Pond leave a dirty smear there instead. Strands of her messy blonde hair hung around her face as she stared into the waters looking for movement. Some bubbles that erupted at the surface made her squeeze tighter. She had to be sure. Everything depended on this being done right. A good sheriff knows how to start a conversation with an opposing force. They'd never resort to the words murder or cover-up in the first few moments. That would only incite feelings of anger, guilt, or even violence. It's best to start on a light note. Maybe the steps taken to arrive at the accusations they were about to throw. Even then, however, if the accused has been following your movements for a while, then it might be better to never speak up at all. Things had calmed down, the only movement coming from a lone blue ribbon that floated in the middle of the small pond. Even the crickets were silent, scared by the noise that had filled the small clearing only a few minutes earlier. The water had stopped moving, and soon the only thing May could see was the darkness of a reflection on the surface. Slowly she released her grip and pulled her hand from the water. There is another thing a good sheriff would never do, May thought, as Jordan Winnia's still body floated to the surface. A good sheriff would always find a safe meeting place. May grasped her ribbon from the water and tied it back into her hair. She was a good sheriff.
My name is Jordan Verna, and if you're reading this, then I wasn't able to meet you, Jenny Green. You just might be the solution to all of this. I can count the number of people that survived the more dangerous areas of this town on one hand. You, however, have survived more of them than anyone. My investigations have all led me here, the Verna Hall garbage dump. I wanted to record this, so that if something happened to me, you could continue what I'm doing. I know you've been through a lot, and I'm sorry for that. But I'm begging you to pull together whatever strength you've got left and help save this town. The smell is unbearable. You have to climb over garbage to get anywhere. I'm trying to keep quiet, but with all this trash I've had to maneuver through, I would be surprised if I wasn't heard. I can hear something moving through the garbage, and sometimes a low whine growl fills the air like that of an angry cat. I've never been scared of cats, but there's something about this growl that makes me uneasy. I'm not welcomed here, but I knew that going in. The number of stray cats living here is outstanding. I've not seen one completely, but every once in a while I'll see a tail disappear around a corner or behind a large piece of discarded furniture. That and their eyes. Since I first stepped beyond the safety of the gate, I've noticed their eyes everywhere, peeking from holes in the distant darkness. Around corners, their eyes follow me. I can feel the malice in their gaze, and I won't lie, I have thought about turning back more than once. I've just found the structure of the old veterinarian building, and that growl is back, only this time it hasn't gone away. There's a door here, like one of those outdoor entrances to the basement. The smell is overwhelming. When I open the door, I can only compare it to week old meat and feces. The growl is coming from down there, and I'm not sure I can go further. I'm scared. I've never been this scared before. There is something at the bottom of the stairs watching me. I can feel its gaze, like a hot, clammy breeze. Wait, what is that? I think it's a small cat-shaped balloon. I can reach it just a little more. Oh no. Oh dear God. There are bodies everywhere. They're hanging from the ceiling and they've got no legs. Jenny, there's writing scratched into their backs. May Fakay is a murderer. She's lying to you all. Willard St trash. The growling is gone, and I can feel that presence again. It's right there, just out of sight. Oh no. So many cats' eyes. I have to get out. They're right behind me. I can feel them claw at my back and hair, but I won't stop running. Get off! I can see the gate. Only a little more. They're biting me and climbing up my back. I'm not gonna make it. Oh, please. Oh, please, no! No! I made it. I made it. But it isn't over. Jenny, I have to confront the sheriff. If I don't make it back, then this should get to you somehow. If I don't make it back, then the sheriff can't be trusted. And I need you to find out what happens to Marie Valkyrie at 316 Willard Street. Please do that for me.
These balloons. Pink cat balloons. Jenny ran a finger through the dust covering the image of a small boy she picked up from the fireplace within 316 Willard Street. What did they mean? Leland leaned against the wall nearby, fiddling with a piece of wallpaper that was peeling away. They could just be the sick calling card of a loony dead pedophile. Loony people don't really have a method to their madness. They're just crazy and should be locked up. Jenny turned until her hazel eyes rested on Leland. Loony people don't just start collecting legs. There's always a reason. I was saying that you... He stopped and let the piece of wallpaper fall till it rested against the wall again. I didn't mean... You're different. I'm sorry. Leland didn't know much about Jenny, but he knew that she had spent most of her life in and out of homes and institutions. Just looking at her you could tell that she'd drawn the short straw. Her long black hair was tangled and dull, and her olive skin was covered with patches of dirt and grime. It had surprised him when she asked him to come with her. He had been coming for his weekly visit, but he never expected to find her waiting for him. When she asked him to join her, he was quick to accept. Something had gotten her speaking again, and he wanted to see where this would go. Jenny slipped the picture out of its frame and flipped it over. Denny Walker, 12. Harvested 3/20/1954. Harvested? Leland looked over her shoulder at the writing scrawling on the back of the picture. Oh, that's gross. This guy was totally messed up. What are you two doing here? The picture frame shattered on the floor as they both turned to see the Sheriff May Fouquet standing in the doorway. This is no place for children. Leland quickly slipped into a fake grin. You killed Jordan. Jenny stomped her foot on the ground, lifting a cloud of dust into the air. You are a murderer. Where did you hear that? That is a dangerous thing to go around blurting out. May's words slurred, and Leland noticed a bottle hanging loosely from her hand. We know you've killed not only Jordan, but the vet, and probably Marie Valkyrie as well. This time, Leland turned wide-eyed to look at Jenny. Well, May slowly shut the door behind her. I gave you a chance to walk away. Leland slipped in front of Jenny as the sheriff pulled her pistol from her pocket. Please, just let us leave. We won't say anything, I swear. I will. Leland heard the steel in Jenny's words. I will tell everyone. Well, kid, this is your unlucky day. May leveled the pistol at Leland. You should have just stayed home, instead of slumming it up with wackos. He saw her finger push on the trigger and closed his eyes, waiting for the pain that followed. He heard a crash, a loud yell, and when he opened his eyes, the sheriff was on the floor, struggling with something unseen. Sammy! Jenny yelled. We need to run. He grabbed Jenny's hand and ran toward the opening leading to the rooms upstairs. They turned the corner at the top of the stairs, finding themselves in a hallway with a door at the end, and several doors opening into other rooms along the way. Jenny, hide in here. Leland opened the nearest door and pushed Jenny inside. Stay quiet. Leland realized, as he closed the door, that those words were insensitive, but he'd have to apologize later. Thumping on the stairs told him he had very little time, so he slipped into one of the doors and waited. I hate doing this. Leland could hear May Fouquet fight to keep her words from slurring. I wasn't always like this." Leland heard her stop in front of Jenny's door and chuckle to herself. It was up here, in this hallway. 3 girls running for our lives. Leland quickly peeked out to see the sheriff leaning her forehead against the door. Janice was always the fastest. She was ahead. Me and Marie, we weren't going to make it. I didn't want to die. I had a future. Leland slipped out his door as the sheriff wrapped her fingers around the doorknob. Marie was going nowhere. She was too attached to this town, too stuck inside her head. The world would go on without her. A quick swipe with my foot, and down she went. She wanted me to go back, but whatever had been after us grabbed her instead, and I was able to escape. So you see, this isn't something I want to do. This is something I have to do. May swung open the door and Leland pounced. Jenny watched as both Leland and the sheriff crashed into the room. They rolled as May tried to aim her gun. A loud bang filled the room, and everything went quiet. Leland's body slumped over May, his eyes vacant. The sheriff was untangling herself from Leland's body as Jenny stepped into the hallway and ran. She almost stopped as she approached the door at the end of the hall. Something about it screamed danger. Something about it made her want to turn away. Ignoring it, Jenny twisted the knob and slid into the room as a shot rang out. She felt a stinging pain in her leg and collapsed. With her uninjured limb, she kicked the door shut. She was instantly surrounded by darkness, the only sound May's laughter outside the door. And that's the last time anyone ever saw Jenny Green. Jenny heard the sheriff's footsteps fade away, but waited several minutes before trying the door. She twisted the knob, but the door didn't want to open again. Her guilt is cute. Jenny whirled and found herself face to face with a small girl. The girl wore a tattered dress and held a small notepad close to her chest. She had a face that should have been smiling, but wasn't. "Marie?" Jenny whispered. Marie frowned up at Jenny. "Not for a long time. Not since that night when he took me, like he's going to do to you." Jenny felt tears well up. "I don't want to go with him." Now the girl smiled, but what should have been lovely and cute was ugly and twisted. "You don't have a choice. He's coming." Jenny stared in horror as the image of Marie began to contort and tear, her body becoming taller, wider, and threatening. "I don't like to eat my veggies. I don't like to eat my stew. I curl my nose at peas and corn, so I will just pass them to you." The voice was thick, old, and soothing, but that didn't stop her skin from crawling as she heard it. "Give me a bucket of ice cream, just one lollipop or two. I would love a caramel apple, only the sweetest sweets will do." What once was Marie Valkyrie was now a tall old man. His body was thin but not aged, and his belly stuck out from under the stained white t-shirt he wore. His face was deceptively kind, his eyes smiling just as much as his mouth was. Jenny ignored the pain as she pushed herself against the door. "Now, now," the murderer with the kind face knelt to look her in the eyes. "Let's not be scared. You're in a safe place now, I promise." She almost believed him. She wanted to believe him. "Open the door, please." "Well," the man's face twisted into a sneer, "that's not happening. I am a collector, and you're my next trophy. This time, you don't have as much room to run." The man laughed, a pleasant laugh, and stepped back into the darkness. Jenny tugged at the door again, but it wouldn't budge. Giving up, she began to limp in the darkness, one hand on the wall looking for a place to hide, a way out, or a weapon. She could hear his breathing, and every so often she'd hear him sing that song again. Slowly, a familiar smell filled her nose that made her breath catch. The smell from the thing in the library. The smell of cinnamon, daffodils, and blood. Tears streamed down her face as she forced herself to move faster against the pain of her leg. Now she could hear him nearby, moving quickly. Her hand wrapped around something thin, and she spun, swinging with all her might. A loud crack filled the room,
as whatever she held connected with the dead man's face. "You ungrateful little child." She felt something heavy slam into her side, sending her flying into the wall. Wincing, she pulled herself to her feet again, the object held in front of her protectively. "I'm not a child anymore," she swung as he approached again, causing him to step away. "I'm not scared of you." His growl filled the room, and she felt herself get thrown into the air. She heard a splintering sound as her body collided and broke through the door to the hallway. She rolled along the hallway floor, a loud, unearthly scream filling her ears and shaking the house. In her hand, she gripped a long, thin cane, topped with the head of a cat. "We're not done playing yet." The hallway began to tear apart as the man's anger and malice ran rampant. Jenny pulled herself along the floor toward the stairs, fighting against the intense wind and flying bits of wood. The sheriff turned into the hallway, a surprised look on her face. A small piece of wood embedded itself in her chest, and she fell to the floor. Jenny yanked herself over the stairs and went tumbling down. She felt his hand grasp her leg, but she swung the cane down hard, and the hand let go. Her body slammed down the stairs as wood and furniture flew around her. A loud cracking noise echoed throughout the house as the ceiling above her head was torn away. There he was, staring down at her as she tried desperately to move against the pain. He was smiling that pleasantly sickening smile when he swooped in. As if running into a wall, his body crumpled. His face filled with rage, he reared to try again, only to be thrown back. Jenny's eyes went wide as she saw Leland slowly form in front of her, followed by Jordan, her mother, and lastly, the sheriff. Jenny didn't wait for a signal. She just pulled with all her might until her body fell into the grass outside 316 Willard Street. The roaring filled the air as the man's rage began to tear the house apart. She watched him fight against the barrier as the building began to collapse around him. She saw her mother turn and smile at her before the collapsing house blocked her from sight. The air slowly calmed, and the noise faded as she pulled herself to her feet. Leaning against the cane, she wiped dirt, blood, and tears from her eyes. The last of the building fell, nothing left but a massive pile of broken wood and furniture. Somewhere between smiling and crying, Jenny turned and began to hobble her way down the street. She'd only gotten a few feet when she felt a wet nose in her dangling palm. Now she did smile. "Sammy, it's all over. Let's go somewhere new." And that was the last time anyone ever saw Jenny Green in Fells Glen.
It first aired on September 9th, 1968. The local television station was surprised to find that one day, instead of the normal infomercial block, the first episode of In the Abyss of Love aired. It was such a success that the station didn't try to stop the signal that was broadcasting the show. Every Monday, at the same time, the show cut into whatever had been previously planned, so the station just left the time open. Soon, everyone in Fells Glen was watching it. The show aired until the summer of 2014, when the station blocked the signal after the last episode brought calls from concerned parents. The last episode consisted of a young girl having a tea party with some stuffed animals. The girl was sitting back in her chair and staring at the camera, her head tilted at an unnatural angle. Her mouth was slack-jawed, and her arm hung down at her side, holding a small teacup. The only sound in the entire episode was of a man crying with increasing intensity. Everyone thought it was a static image until the small teacup slipped out of the girl's hand and shattered on the floor in the last minute of the episode. In the Abyss of Love was a phenomenal show. It touched on some tough subjects in interesting ways and even had accurate representation of the technology of today back when it first aired. However, the world beyond Fells Glen had no idea it existed, because it only aired there, and copies quickly became corrupt as soon as they left the town. Before the explosion, there was no way to see the show outside of Fells Glen. Before the explosion, there was a Fells Glen. In the fall of 2014, a massive explosion tore through Fells Glen, leveling half of it and cutting the population from 3,200 to 10. At the time, I was out of town for business, but my entire house was destroyed, along with my extensive collection of In the Abyss of Love episodes. I was devastated, and as soon as I got settled in a new town, I went back to Fells Glen to see if I could find any surviving episodes. I found one, the first episode. I remember standing at the edge of the crater that was once my hometown, staring at the ruined buildings and feeling a chill run down my spine. I've never believed in ghosts, a surprise since I grew up in a town whose laws were based on superstitious mumbo-jumbo. However, I could swear, as I stood looking over the deteriorated landscape, that running, jumping, and playing through the ruined buildings and half-standing pillars were the shadows of little children, each one holding a cat-shaped balloon, except one. One of them was rabbit-shaped.